fly buzz about. I just saw, all right, it's saying that the internet's giving us permission to live another day. That's what it's telling me. But you know me, until I see it, I don't believe it. Until I see it, I am a doubting, whatever you want to call it. I'm not seeing it. Okay, now I'm seeing it. Now it's coming through. And I just saw a fly. I just saw a fly buzz around. So there's a fly doing their thing. Whatever. It's crazy times here in California. What are you going to do? What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. We're coming at you at a different time than our usual time. So good afternoon, good evening, or if you're in the future, good morning, which, by the way, our guest today comes to us from the future. It's Tuesday morning where he's at. Before I bring him in, quick shout out to the people who make this show possible. ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules. I've been obsessed with the white peach Chinese tea. It's so good. It's a black tea, and there's like a peach, or excuse me, it's a white tea. There's a peach infusion. Oh, so great. And you can get it all wholesale now because of the pandemic. Friend of the show, Big Lefty, supplies the tea to get your news on with Ron. ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Our friends over at treeofjoyoil.com, what's trendy. Thank you so much for the recent care package. I look forward to diving into that book you got me. And thank you for the pain oil. They make topical pain oil you put on your body. You guys know that I use it all the time. It does wonders for my neck. If you need some pain oil, check it out. treeofjoyoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Without further ado, my guest today, I had the privilege of meeting this guy when I was in Adelaide. We had an amazing conversation over a few beers, and he's an insanely bright guy. So the whole time I was like, man, I really wish I was sober for this thing. Then I would only be lagging behind by a lot instead of an awful lot. But he is an economics professor at the University of Adelaide. He specializes in MMT, and we're going to be talking to him. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Stephen Hale. What's up, Stephen?
I'm fine, Ron. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for being here. I know it's 8:30 in the morning in Adelaide, Australia, where you're at.
Yeah, I'm speaking from a parallel universe. It's tomorrow morning here. It's springtime here.
Right. Everything's different.
And we're on a small island a long way away from everywhere. So I'm also from a parallel universe where there's no coronavirus here, or virtually none.
We were talking about that briefly off mic. So there's basically people don't need to wear masks where you're at. Is that the consensus, or what's going on out there?
It's a little bit different from, it's not that small an island. It's about the same size as the USA geographically. So it's a bit different in different states. But in South Australia, life is normal.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. So venues are open, bars are open.
Everything's open. Nobody's wearing masks.
Wow.
But because we don't have to, because there are no cases in the community.
So I could just, well, no one's letting us in, but if they were letting us in,
we're not allowed out either.
Oh, I gotcha. All right. Yeah. So if only they could let us in, I could just go to Adelaide. What they should do, but I guess they really, because they can't let people in, they can't do this. But what would be awesome is if they just had the Adelaide Fringe Festival indefinitely. They just kept having it. Like they're like, so our Fringe Festival, it usually happens in January for like a month or whatever it is. But we're just going to start it, and it's just going to keep going until nobody wants to do it anymore, and this whole freaking thing ends. And then I would try to get out to Adelaide and just perform wherever until this thing ends. That would be what I would try to do. But
yeah, well, nothing happens in Adelaide except the Fringe. So 11 months of the year, there's no one here. It's empty and nothing's happening.
You know what, man? You give me a beautiful coast, which Adelaide has. You give me some great places to eat, some cool people, and a stage to perform in. I can be happy forever, pretty much. So I'll take it. If only that were reality, I would do. If anyone from the Adelaide Fringe is listening, hear me out. You screen the artist ahead of time. You give us like special passes to get in. We'll all take tests. We'll all quarantine first, and then we just have a big Fringe festival in Adelaide until there is a vaccine and this is all over. I'm in. Steven's in. We got two people already. Adelaide, are you listening? All right. So anyway, let's get to some interesting topics here. So you are one of the leading MMT scholars, I would say, in the world. Maybe is that fair? I mean, you might disagree with me because you're a humble guy, but I think that's fair to say.
I teach modern monetary theory at a university. I'm not one of the developers of modern monetary theory. It's fair to say that I know or have met all the developers, but and it's also fair to say that I knew them before MMT was really fashionable and everybody knew about it. So yeah, I've been doing it for a long time.
So before we get into MMT land, let's start where I feel like is the basis of all this, and this kind of calls back to a conversation you and I had at a bar. What is the most basic misconception people have when it comes to money?
Well, the most basic thing that people misunderstand is the importance of the distinction between a currency issuer and a currency user. So you and I and businesses and not-for-profit organizations and even state governments like California's government and South Australia's government are currency users, not currency issuers. So before we can spend dollars, we have to go and get them. We have to earn them, or we have to have saved them up in the past, or we can go and borrow them. But if we borrow them, we've got to pay them back in the future with interest, and that'll be a burden on us in the future, and we could even become insolvent and go bankrupt. That's not true of the federal government. It's not true of the Australian federal government, which is the monopoly issuer of the Australian dollar. It's not true of the US government, which is the monopoly issuer of the US dollar. They're currency issuers, not currency users. They don't have to go and find dollars before they spend them. And in fact, in a sense, it's the other way around. Before dollars are available to the private sector to use or to pay their taxes, federal taxes to the government, the federal government has to spend those dollars into circulation, because you can't pay your taxes with non-existent dollars. And I know people talk about private banks creating money, but federal taxes are paid with dollars held in reserve accounts at the Federal Reserve, with federal funds, in other words. And those only come from the Federal Reserve itself or the federal government, nowhere else. So the government or its central bank has to spend dollars into circulation or lend dollars into circulation before they're available to pay taxes or to buy government bonds. That's the way round it goes. And the federal government can't ever run out of dollars. And everybody from Alan Greenspan to Stephanie Kelton to Warren Mosler to William Mitchell will tell you that, because it's just a pure fact. What that means is that when it comes to federal spending,
Is there a tea kettle where you are or something? Do you hear that?
No, that's a distant. I live in a really nice house, but the reason why I can afford this really nice house is that there is a railway line outside.
Oh,
which doesn't it doesn't have commuter trains running along it, but it has the freight trains from Adelaide to Melbourne.
Okay, so that's a train we're hearing. All right.
That's right. It's on its way to Melbourne. I don't know what it's Melbourne is not coronavirus free, so it's a very different country over there, or state. But there is a train that's on its way there, which has just gone by. Very long.
Oh, got it. I thought it was like a tea kettle or something, and I was like, Steven, if you got some tea on, go ahead, grab it. I don't want it. You know, when I was in Adelaide, I had an incident with a toaster, so I have appliance moments in Adelaide, so I wouldn't want you to have one.
You nearly burnt the house down. Yeah,
I did.
No, it's a half a mile long tea kettle, if it's a tea kettle, but it's gone.
Right,
it's gone now. As I was saying, if the federal government wishes to continue, and they are withdrawing that support at the moment unless they get their act together in Washington, D.C. If they wish to continue to support state governments and people in the US, then the only issue with doing that is that although they can't run out of dollars, they can run out of things to buy with those dollars. So the US can run out of real productive resources. And so under those circumstances, if there's too much spending in the US, it could be inflationary. There's no significant issue with that at the moment. And in the long run, as the US, I hope, under some future administration, and I think we both agree that neither of the options are very attractive at the moment, under some future administration, if the government moves towards enacting a genuine Green New Deal, then there are a lot of ways to free up productive capacity in the US to allow for the necessary investments. You could ban fracking and offshore drilling, end fossil fuel subsidies, go ahead with Medicare for all and crack down on the pharmaceutical companies, break up your major banks, engage in a series of banking reforms, criminal justice reforms, even cut military spending, because you really don't need to spend nearly as much as you do from the point of view of national defense. All those things, it's not a question of using up dollars that the government wouldn't have otherwise, but they all use up people and equipment and natural resources and other real resources, which you could free up, and then President Ocasio-Cortez or somebody like that, one day I hope will be in a position to deploy those real resources to rapidly transition to renewables, ensure everybody has healthcare and everybody has a secure income, and issues like homelessness are dealt with, and people have access to free education up to and including going to college and all those kind of things. You can afford to do those things.
Right. So you turned me on to the work of David Graeber, and in particular the book Debt, which I did read. It took me a minute, and I had to go over things a couple times, depending on the chapter. But it seemed like one of the themes in that book was he talked about how there has always been some form of currency just as a way of keeping track of exchanges. So really, like, the whole point of it, when, government got involved and when politics got involved and taxation got involved, it was basically kind of a mechanism to just tally control. Is that accurate, or is that like incomplete, or?
Well, it goes David's book, and he was a tremendous loss. I didn't know him personally, but we had friends in common, and it's just to lose him, someone who'd done all that good work and had so much still to give so young. It was a terrible tragedy. But David's book, amongst other things, drawing on the work of the MMT scholar Michael Hudson, amongst other people, it goes back into the ancient history of the emergence of money, and backs up that ancient history by references to modern anthropology in communities that have been only been invaded by what we might call the modern world in the last 100 years or so, and talks about the fact that money emerged maybe 5,000 years ago, maybe a bit more than 5,000 years ago, after the emergence of farming in the Middle East and food and surpluses from farming, so that not everybody had to be involved in hunting or gathering food now. It was possible to support more people than were involved in food production, which allowed for the emergence of early religions, temple communities, the earliest forms of government with public servants and soldiers, and those people had to be provisioned for, and that involved accounting. It also involved a form of taxation. So there were wars, and people who lost those wars had to pay tributes to the growing empire that had won the war, and those tributes were initially measured, although they weren't always paid, in terms of weight of barley or other agricultural crop, and that weight of barley was the first unit of account. You didn't have to pay your taxes or your tribute in physical units of barley, but shekels of barley were used to value the payment that you made to the government. And then so basically agriculture led to early forms of government, which led to war, numeracy, accounting, taxation, and money as a unit of account, which is what you were talking about, a way of recording or accounting for transactions, was the way in which those early tax payments were assessed. We're being a little bit oversimplistic here because, as you just said, it's a very long book and it's a complicated story.
Sure.
But yeah, and if you want to, in a modern context, as people often talk about, our monetary system has similarities to the point system when you're recording points in a basketball game. And so, as we were saying before, just as the federal government can't run out of dollars, so if you're playing a basketball game, they don't ever end the game early because you run out of points to put up on the system. And our modern monetary system is just really, as Warren Mosler often says, a huge spreadsheet. You just need a few $100 worth of software and you can simulate a modern monetary system. And the creation of currency by the currency issuer is no more complicated than typing some numbers into a cell on a spreadsheet, and you're right. After that, it's just basically an accounting system. It's not a commodity that we can run out of. Money isn't gold, although gold and other commodities have played a role historically in monetary systems. They've never been money. Money has always been, or currencies anyway, have always been that which is necessary to pay your taxes to a central governmental authority. And again, we're back to what you were talking about, really. They're just a way of recording transactions, credits and debts. It makes sense for the private sector to do its accounting in the same units that the government accounts for our tax liabilities. And while it's not inevitable that always has to be the case in every society, historically, that's what has been the case.
So let's bring MMT into the mix then. So what essentially is MMT? Going on that basis of this is what money is, this is how money is made, and it is just created by the person who has the dictatorship over creating it in a society. What is MMT and how does that fit in?
Well, modern monetary theory is just a brand name for an approach to thinking about the economy and public finance that takes all that into account. The US government, and this is not just the case with the US, it's true of Australia and Canada and the UK and Japan and New Zealand and some other countries too, have governments that are a special type of currency issuer that we often refer to as a monetary sovereign. To be a monetary sovereign, you not only have to issue your own currency and collect taxes in that currency. The tax collection is important because it ensures there's always going to be a demand for that currency. Even if people want to engage in barter transactions or use cryptocurrencies, they'll always have to get US dollars because their taxes are assessed in US dollars. It's also important that the currency issuer does not guarantee to convert that currency at a fixed rate into anything which it could possibly run out of. So you have to not be on a gold standard to be a full monetary sovereign, and the US went off gold finally in August 1971. You have to not be on a fixed exchange rate against any foreign currency, and you have to not have a significant amount of foreign currency denominated debt. Now, all those things are true of the US and have been true for many years, and they've been true in Australia since the early 1980s too. So both our countries have monetary sovereign governments. If you are a monetary sovereign government, there is no financial constraint on federal government spending. There is only, as I was saying before, a real constraint or an inflation barrier that you have to be careful that you don't cross. So when you're talking about planning for a Green New Deal, for example, or whatever else the US federal government wants to plan for in the future when it's doing its budgeting, it shouldn't be focusing, as the Congressional Budget Office does at the moment, on the implications for the federal government's budget balance in the years ahead, in the next decade. That's not what they should be doing. They should always be looking at their spending plans. And sure, the structure of taxation and whatever else they're going to do to limit private sector spending in the economy. And they should be comparing the implications of those plans with the productive capacity of the US economy. And as long as they don't go beyond that productive capacity and create inflation because the government and the private sector are competing for scarce real resources and driving up their prices, then it really doesn't matter what the budget balance in itself is going to be. It's inappropriate to target a particular government deficit. And we like to say that the government's deficit is just everybody else's surplus. So people can be much more relaxed when you read in the paper or online about how big the federal deficit is going to be this year. Just change that word deficit to surplus, and remember that the government's deficit is your surplus. They're giving you more than they're taking away, and we can be relaxed about that. And you can also be relaxed about what they often call the national debt, which people, particularly in the US, actually seem to have virtually have a fit about when they start looking at projections for the future. The government's debt is not your debt at all. It's the debt of the currency issuer that can't run out of dollars. All it is all the dollars the federal government's ever spent into the US monetary system and hasn't yet taxed back out of the system again. That's all it is. So the issue is always, do you have the real resources? If you want to transition very rapidly towards renewables, which in the US, which has per capita based on consumption emissions of carbon dioxide at the moment of 21.2 tons, you need, for that to be sustainable, to get it down to 1.6 tons, which means basically you've got to get rid of all of it. So there needs to be a massive transition to renewables and electricity. There needs to be massive electrification of the US economy, and it has to happen more or less overnight, or at least within the next 10 years, and ideally within the first half of the next 10 years, if we're not going to be on the way to hothouse Earth. Because the three countries, if you can call Europe a country, that are going to determine what happens to this planet are the US and the European Union and China. And two of those three have to be taking radical action in the next 10 years. So climate scientists and Earth system scientists tell us, for us to have any hope in the future of having a world, a planet which will support the 10 or 11 billion people that we're forecast to have at some point this century. So that's more important than everything else. We need to be making rapid progress to that. It's by no means the only issue with our planetary boundaries that we're living beyond, but it's the most pressing one. Can we afford to do that? Sure, we can afford the dollars. The issue is not about the dollars, it's about the real resources, and that's where we go back to what I was saying before: ban fracking and offshore drilling, end fossil fuel subsidies, free up some real resources by slimming down the incredibly inefficient and massively expensive medical system in the US. Deal with the way the banking system and Wall Street absorbs real resources, which means dealing with some of the excessive inequality in the US. Those kind of things, you need to then look at them and say, right, what real resources can we free up? Do we have the necessary skills and technology available? If we've got shortages of skills, can we train people? What investments are we going to make? It's all about, and I know people hate words like this, not maybe listeners to your podcast perhaps, but a lot of people do. It's going to need a lot of planning and intervention by the federal government. It needs an activist government. It needs a sort of Roosevelt type of philosophy. It doesn't need the kind of philosophy that we've had in recent decades, because the neoliberalism of recent decades It's not just driven us to social injustice and all the things that we could list, but it is driving us towards hothouse Earth and the potential virtual extinction of our species.
In other words, there's nothing pragmatic about an incremental solution to a catastrophic problem.
There is no incremental solution to this
Exactly.
problem.
Right. All right.
30 years ago, there would have been. If we'd done this soon after James Hansen told everybody about it. But we haven't. We've done absolutely nothing yet. Global emissions, US emissions come down a tiny bit in recent years, but global emissions, but I mean, let's face it, and you can't complain to low-income countries in Africa about their emissions going up a little bit, because they're not responsible for the problem. It's Australia and America and Britain, and we've caused the problem down through the decades, and it's been accelerating. If you're 30 years old, 50% of this has happened in your lifetime. That's the problem. And our record year for global emissions was 2019. So we haven't even got going with this yet. And that's where you're absolutely right. And we were talking a little bit about US politics before, and I won't give away what you said, but if I was not in a marginal state, I would be voting for somebody who was in favor of a genuine attempt to confront these issues. If I was in a marginal state, I'd be just making sure that Donald Trump wasn't president, because I think another 4 years, the trouble with Trump is he doesn't admit there's any problem at all. And at least Biden, you're right, there is no solution when you're talking about an incremental solution, but at least we've got to the point where somebody is grudgingly admitting there is a problem.
Isn't that sad? That's where the bar is. I mean, isn't that disturbing that it's like, well, one guy says it's a thing, whether or not he wants to do anything about it, I don't know, but he's saying it's a thing at least.
Yeah, well, the good news is that technologically we could do something about it, and the real resources exist or could be created. It will require, for some years, even post-pandemic, a significant level of deficit spending by the US government. But that's not the problem. The problem is freeing up the real resources to allow for the deficit spending, which will create loads of jobs. There's not going to be a shortage of jobs. There's plenty of. We've got an enormous amount to do, and it's going to require people, and in some cases, it's going to require training people in order to do the things which it's necessary to get done. So we're not looking at a future where there's no jobs. There's, for a long time to come anyway, there's going to be a lot of jobs, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's not going to be done by robots.
So let's stick with like the Green New Deal as an example, and then kind of bring MMT back into this, and just tell me if I'm like in the ballpark with this, if I'm getting it right, if I'm getting it wrong, because this is kind of how I understood Stephanie Kelton's explanation. Like, say we go about something like a Green New Deal, employing the concepts of MMT, where, okay, we have these costs such as infrastructure, such as, electrifying the grid, windmills, whatever else, list goes on. And we put this printed money into that cost, and that is just basically a sunk cost. We just paid for it because we printed the money and we just did it. Then we
never say printed, but yes.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Yeah. Create, right? Is create the right. Okay. So create the money,
that's fine.
And then it's paid for. So that's just paid for. That's just out. That money's not in circulation now. It's not there. But what is in circulation is all the jobs.
Yeah, the money's in circulation still. People, if you pay people, they're going to spend it. It's going to end up in somebody else's bank account.
But that's where the jobs come.
Some of it you're going to tax back. But yeah, so the issue is, first of all, do you have the necessary skills and resources to do the things that you want to do? And then secondly, Do you have the necessary real resources while you're living within our planetary boundaries to provide the goods and services that people are going to buy while receiving that income? Those are the things that you have to take into account, and it's a tricky problem. You have to look at all the different pay-fors, all the ways in which you can free up resources, and it may well be that if the investments that you intend to make are very high because you need to make a dramatic transition, I'm not going to promise that it's not going to be necessary at some stage to raise some taxes. But if you do raise taxes, the role of those taxes is to limit inflation. It's not to pay for anything. And so whether you need higher taxes or not involves you looking at the real resource implications and the degree of spare capacity that exists in the economy, in the important sectors, the real resource implications of your spending plans. You then have to get down into the nitty-gritty of the consumer price index or whatever measure of inflation you're looking at, and look at issues like monopoly power and pricing. And if once you've done all that, once you've looked at all the pay-fors that you can come up with, once you've looked at the resources that are available, if you still think your plans are inflationary, then don't make any apology for having to raise taxes if that's necessary in order to limit inflation. But, and this may shock people, it may not be, because there are lots of ifs there, and it involves people doing the sort of detailed research that people like Stephanie and her colleagues are doing, and I'm not possibly well informed enough about the US to comment on in detail. Taxes are important. Taxes create a demand for the US dollar in the first place. That's why a monetary sovereign has to have an efficient tax system in place. After that, taxes are one of the ways of limiting inflationary pressure in the economy if you do get towards the productive capacity and start to drive inflation up. And then, of course, we've got other purposes for taxes too. I'd be taxing rich people because they're too rich. They've got too much power. The good news from MMT is you don't need their money. You don't really need them either. You don't need their money. And we've got some billionaire miners in Australia. And I often say to people, if we tax them more and they say they're going to leave the country, fine, I'll drive them to the airport. If that happens, you don't need that.
You know what you should do, Stephen? You should tell them you'll drive them to the airport, and then at the last minute, be like, you know what? I changed my mind. Take the frickin' train. You can hear it right outside. I don't want to drive you. Take
Absolutely.
The train.
And they'd have to jump.
Melbourne.
They'd have to jump on as well because it's a freight train, so they have to sit on the back. But yeah, that's the frame that you get from modern monetary theory. And I would only add to that if you if you would go through what I've just said to what you might call a mainstream, or we call a neoclassical economist, a Paul Krugman, then at the end of the discussion he'd say, well, of course I knew that already. But they don't know it, or they say things which contradict what we've just been talking about. There's a really interesting debate that happened on I think Bloomberg. It's on Stephanie Kelton's site anyway, between her and Paul Krugman, where he really struggled to get his head around some of these MMT ideas. I mean, even from the point of view of they've never really properly thought about how the monetary system works, these guys. That's why they're so terrified about debt and deficits a lot of the time. And Paul Krugman certainly used to think that if the government ran a big deficit, it would mean they were borrowing money from the private sector and taking it out of the private sector, and that would drive interest rates up. Whereas when you understand the monetary system, actually, when the government deficit spends, it's actually creating currency and putting it into the private sector. And if you then didn't do anything else, if you didn't issue government bonds to withdraw those dollars from the financial system again, interest rates would go down, not up. So these guys, when they say, oh, MMT is nothing new, or we knew it all along, it just sounds what we were always saying, it's absolutely not the case. And the fact that the most influential, and according to some measures, Paul Krugman is the world's most influential economist. The most influential economists don't understand how the US monetary system works. Larry Summers, there's a book by Warren Mosler called 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy, which is freely available online if somebody wants to Google Warren Mosler's book. And you'll see a conversation he had with Larry Summers in there, likely to be a senior person in the Biden administration, of course, where Larry Summers admitted that he doesn't understand how reserves are accounted for at the Federal Reserve, doesn't understand the mechanics of the monetary system. And that's one of our complaints about how economics has been done down the decades. When you are discussing something complicated like how the economy works, of course you have to make simplifying assumptions and you abstract from some things that you don't think are important. They abstracted from the monetary system. So they never took into account how money actually works. And that was the big insight of Warren Mosler and Randall Wray and Stephanie Kelton and William Mitchell and the other people that developed modern monetary theory. They said, actually, the economy is basically a monetary system. It's a set of bank accounts, or you could say balance sheets, all interlocking with each other and evolving over time, often evolving in ways which are unsustainable or likely to lead to crisis, or at least likely to lead to inequality and underemployment. And in capitalism, the monetary system matters. It's right at the center of the economy. Once you understand the monetary system properly, then we think you basically get MMT. And I think it is inevitable over the next few years that macroeconomics, I think we might have too much momentum for this to come back the other way. This is the first challenge that the old-fashioned economists have had for at least 80 years. And I think we've gone so far with it now that we're bound to win. Well, there's just so much momentum.
Let me ask you this, and this might be like a little United States centric, but I feel like it's all around the world too. Do you think in some cases, maybe not so much in academia amidst economists, but kind of in the political realm, do you think there's a certain amount of willful ignorance? Because, I mean, I think the argument can be made, and I've heard it been made by other people, where MMT is already being put in practice. It's just being put in practice for the rich and the powerful. And we saw it through this pandemic where it's like, hey, what do you need, Wall Street? What do you need, banks? What do you need, airlines? We'll just move the decimal point wherever you want. But for the people, ooh, how are we going to pay for that? So in some ways, MMT is just, and I know this is totally an oversimplification, but for theme's sake, it's taking that concept that is already benefiting the richest among us and saying, hey, we can use this same concept to give everyone healthcare and for a Green New Deal and for things that actually help everybody. So do you think there's a willful ignorance going on?
It's complicated. There's a mix of factors, but you're absolutely right. MMT just describes the system as it is. It is genuinely the case that a high proportion of academic economists around the world really do not understand the monetary system. There are, I'm sure, some people, including some very famous economists, who willfully misrepresent the system, and you'll see some of them interviewed on movies like, if anybody's ever seen the documentary from the Great Recession, Inside Job. That's a great documentary about what led up to that. You'll see some famous economists being interviewed there, one or two of whom were on the Federal Reserve Board at the time. So yeah, it's a mix. I think the majority of my colleagues, it's difficult to explain if you haven't had an economics education, but the people that find it most difficult to accept the validity of the modern monetary theory frame are trained economists, because we genuinely, some of what we learn is useful. But some of what we learn as we go through mainstream economics degree is just really, well, what do I want to say? It's not useful at all and misleading. And they come out of this training thinking that this very abstract model of a world completely different to the world that you and I live in is the correct description of the way the world actually works. So I don't think they're all dishonest. As far as politicians are concerned, again, I don't want to be rude. I've often talked to politicians. I was yesterday, and some of them are incredibly bright and sharp people. And most of them, when they go into politics, at least initially do it with the best of motives.
That might be true where you live. That's not true where I live. Not in my experience. My experience has been the opposite, and that's just me being honest. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just being honest.
No. Well, all right. Let me just go a bit further. Don't endow them with more intelligence than they've actually got. A lot of them genuinely, and you'll find this. If people have read Stephanie Kelton's Deficit Myth, they'll find this. A lot of them genuinely don't understand the system. When it is explained to them, and there is a story in Stephanie's book of her and Warren talking about MMT to a progressive Democrat who sits there uncomfortably for quite a while, and then at the end of the conversation his eyes light up and finally gets it. He understands it all, but then he says, I can't say that. And there's a story in Warren's book about him at an event during the 2000 presidential campaign, sitting next to Al Gore. And Warren, Al Gore turns to Warren and says, how am I going to spend the surplus when I'm president? And Warren says to Al Gore, you're not going to have a surplus when you're president. That's not the way the monetary system is going to work. The government can only run a surplus if the private sector goes further into debt and runs a deficit. And Warren Mosler was explaining, well, it's impossible. That's going to happen. And so Warren explained modern monetary theory to Al Gore, and Al Gore apparently was a good student. By the end of the conversation, got what Warren was saying. But then he stood up and gave the speech, and the speech was as though he'd never had the conversation with Warren. They feel like they can't say these things. Sometimes it's for corrupt reasons, you're right. Sometimes it's because they're representing interest groups or contributors or people that they want to work for later on. Sometimes it's because they're terrified of Rupert Murdoch, who has been the most powerful man in the world over the past 30 years. Not Donald Trump, Rupert Murdoch. He's been
from your neck of the woods.
From Adelaide. News International.
I knew it was Australia. I didn't know it was Adelaide.
No. News International was founded in Adelaide. And when it moved to New York, the company, its headquarters, it moved from Adelaide to New York. So I am in the city. We gave the world the Murdoch empire and all that. I apologize to the world.
That's okay.
That.
You guys can fix it right now. You just have that never-ending fringe, like I recommended, and let people in.
No, he might come back.
He might come too. That's the problem.
Actually, you met a colleague of mine, Phil Lawn, the ecological economist, when you were here. Phil's mum used to work for Rupert Murdoch.
No kidding.
She was his secretary years and years and years ago.
Does she have stories?
She's not with us anymore. I'm sad to say, but that was when he was a small-time local newspaper proprietor in Adelaide. But yes, they're scared of the media. They're scared of the people that give them contributions, especially in the US, where, of course, there's a huge amount of money and lobbying that goes into politics. Sometimes they want a job from these people. Very often, though, with politicians, well, I guarantee that if we were to make up a short set of multiple choice questions on how the monetary system works, and we were to give it to the guys in Congress in Washington, D.C., the majority of them would get most of the questions wrong. And they wouldn't get them wrong deliberately. They just, I suppose they don't have any reason to understand how the system works, and they go through life not knowing. It's convenient not to know. But.
No, I think you're right. I mean, even something like Wall Street, which, I mean, someone like me, I am as against Wall Street as one can be. But if you're going to be a politician, you have to understand how it works. Like you have to really, and I don't know all the, like, every single in and out of it, but you have to make policy that's going to, be better for society. You have to understand how Wall Street works in the contemporary United States. If you don't, it'd be like trying to be a race car driver, but you don't know what a steering wheel does.
These people are very often now just trying to keep their jobs, as we've seen with all the Republicans that have said nothing as Donald Trump has got more and more crazy over time. They're just trying to keep their jobs. And again, I understand this to an extent, but I've had conversations with politicians in Australia where I've explained this stuff to them, and we've got to a certain point, and they then said they didn't really want to hear anymore because the phrase you often get is, "It's above my pay grade." That's the way. So
you
just
make
have
laws. You make laws.
Well, no.
What you do.
The Prime Minister makes the laws. I just turn out and vote.
Well, not you, but I mean, yeah. I meant the
politicians. I mean the politicians. When you say that,
right? But still,
they just vote the way they're told very often.
That is what they would say to me in response to that.
Yeah, but absolutely. But we are making progress, and in the US, you're making a lot of progress, and there are an increasing number of progressives inside and outside the Democratic Party. You have to be inside the Democratic Party to get elected, the way things are federally. And there are some great people.
That changes.
Yeah, there are some great people. I have an immense amount of confidence and belief in people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and in the next generation. I just hope that they have a fair chance. I hope that we haven't passed on to them a world which is very difficult to deal with because of all the ecological damage that we've caused, as well as all the other elements of injustice. And the sooner we get things right, the better. Which is why a lot of us, and people like Fadel Kaboub, who I didn't mention before in the US, are we're working ourselves to distraction. There are a small group of us around the world who are permanently exhausted at the moment because we're just pushing everywhere we possibly can push. A federal job guarantee we're pushing for. We managed to get the Tasmanian state government to pass a motion, or state parliament to pass a motion to investigate a job guarantee. But of course, you need it to be done federally. I'm trying to do something similar to that in South Australia. If we can get all the states and territories to ask for one, maybe at a federal election, we can turn it into an issue. If only the candidate had been Bernie Sanders, the US would have been months away from a federal job guarantee now, and from everything else in the Green New Deal. So it was just too tough. He did
so painful.
He did the best that he could do, but it was just too difficult. And sometimes somebody has to try and fail before somebody can try and succeed. And he got close.
He did. I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm not going to sit here and say I agree with every step Bernie took. I certainly didn't. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of things that disappointed me immensely. But I think at the end of the day, we needed a reformer to be a revolutionary, and that's just not the way the world works. The reformer needs other people to be the revolutionaries, and we weren't, for whatever reason, and I don't think you can point the finger at one particular element or person or anything else, but we weren't able to have that gelling to be enough that it could overcome the nonsense that he was faced with. Because, I mean, it was not a legit primary in 2016. It was not a legit primary in 2020. And, now we are where we are. And when you look at what especially happened recently in different parts of the world, you think, wow, we could be weeks away from a Bernie Sanders presidency. It hurts. It really hurts, Stephen.
If we can turn things around in the years to come, then the history books of the future will have Bernie Sanders as an immense figure. I think that we're only going to appreciate. I don't agree with everything he said and did, and he certainly didn't always use an MMT. He never really used an MMT frame when discussing the issues that we wanted.
He likes Stephanie Kilton though a lot.
He does, yes, he does, and that story is told in Stephanie's book. And it's very difficult when you've been talking like a fiscal conservative for 50 years to turn around and start using a new frame in public once you're aware of it. To an extent he did, but not to the extent we would have liked. But when people are critical of Bernie, I'd just like to say, name anybody else that's made such an important contribution when it comes to creating a just and sustainable future world in the last 50 years, and you can't really. So he's an immense figure.
Well, what he did here, which is something I'll always be thankful for, is he was just in the right place at the right time and showed us that we weren't as alone as we thought we were, that the political thumb of the United States is not quite what we thought it was. Because of Bernie Sanders, I learned that there's more people who think like me than I realize. I learned that, it really is, our electoral politics are really rigged worse than I thought. They're really, completely bought even worse than I thought, to the point where I think it's fair to say the United States is a complete corporate coup. And I think Bernie, because of the rhetorical situation of 2016 and then again in 2020, he really was a prominent figure in waking the country up to that. So, what's going to happen next? Unfortunately, no matter what happens, we're not quite going to have an ally in the White House, no matter what, but there's a lot we can do locally. So let me ask you this for one last question, and then there's a viewer question or two I'd like to get to before you leave. I know you got a lecture coming up, but there's a couple questions in the chat that I am not smart enough to answer. So, but what would you say is something, as far as pushing for an MMT future, what are some things that people can do on the ground floor outside of electoralism?
As far as pushing for an MMT future is concerned, well, MMT is the present. So, but yes, in terms of using an understanding of the monetary system in order to push for social and environmental justice, I just think everybody should do whatever they can do. What we've done in Adelaide, we had a conference in Adelaide in January that Stephanie was at, amongst other people, and Bill Mitchell was here too. Andres Bernal, who's in the AOC camp, he was here, and out of that, we've set up in Adelaide a group called the Sustainable Prosperity Action Group. We bought about 300 copies of Stephanie's book, and wherever possible, we've been to see and handed copies to politicians, journalists, opinion formers. We've had a variety of events over time. We were, I think, instrumental in helping to get that Tasmanian job guarantee motion passed. We're trying to do the same thing in South Australia and in Canberra, which is where our federal government is as well. So get involved in something. There's lots of and you can almost pick an aspect of the sunrise in in the US. There's all sorts of progressive campaigns, and we can all get involved in one way or another. Meantime, as far as MMT is concerned, if you don't feel comfortable about discussing it with your friends because you don't feel well enough informed, then if you can afford it, get a copy of Stephanie's book, which is very readable, really easy to get through, and read through that. And if you can't afford it, then Warren's book's sort of a decade old now, but Google Warren Mosler, and his book will introduce you to MMT as well, and that's freely available on the internet. And then just talk to people. And when politicians, when economists say things that don't make any sense, like there's going to be a fiscal crisis, the government's going to be, Social Security is going to go bankrupt in the US. No, it's not. That can't ever happen. It doesn't matter who says it. I don't care if it's a professor of economics with a Nobel Prize. If they say that kind of thing, they're just wrong. And so whenever anybody says anything wrong, I like to encourage people not to be rude, because if you're too aggressive with your comments, then I'm not worried about you being rude to Professor somebody or other, but it puts off third parties. There are other people. So I always, if I'm interacting with let's call them a neoliberal economist on Twitter or somewhere else, I always try, I don't always manage, but I always try to appear calm and quiet and polite and just a bit disappointed that economist gets things wrong, because that often annoys them and they bite back. And then if there is a third party out there, you're the one that appears to be, as you are,
you're the
rational,
civil one.
That's right. And they appear to be they're the one that appears to be the lunatic.
No, that's the way to do it, man. Be like, look, I'm just, you have the same piece of paper I do, colleague. I'm disappointed that you're just swinging and missing, and yet you're going to go to another conference and people are going to listen to you. I find that off-putting, and then they get really pissed off at you.
I was lucky enough to spend 2 weeks following Stephanie around while she was here to various occasions, and we met politicians and journalists and all sorts of other people, and I saw her give talks, and I interviewed her a couple of times in front of people. And I'm quite long in the tooth, but you never stop learning. And it was like a masterclass in how to communicate. She is a brilliant communicator.
She really is. I never got to interview her myself, but I was, in studio with some of the interviews she did with the Jimmy Dore show. And the way she explains it, you just listen to it and you're like, wow, that totally makes sense. And I feel like my head just got lifted. Someone just scratched my brain a little bit. But then the thing is, she's so good at it that a week later, if I had to regurgitate that to someone else, I'd be like, shit, you got to go listen to her. You know what I mean?
I'm like that a bit too. We can do it to an extent, we can anchor and adjust. We learn from other people, and we can do some of what they do. And we're on a team. We don't all have to agree with each other, but the basics are so simple that anyone who understands, that's got any sense, is going to agree with us. So I just think I'm angry about a lot of these things. I'm really angry, but it doesn't pay to come over as Mr. Angry all the time. You want to appear as we are, the calm, sensible people that have got some kind of idea about what we should do in the future. And then, if you can't remember something or don't know, then it's fine to refer them to Stephanie or Stephanie's book. And if you've got a friend who doesn't quite get it or is reluctant, but is of goodwill, and you can afford it, go and buy them a copy of Stephanie's book and give it to them. There's a Christmas present.
There you go.
And say we'll chat about this after Christmas, but have a look at this book now. And
or read and pass. I've done that. Have you ever done that? Are you a read and pass guy? I've done that where I'm like, this book's great. I'm passing it to you now. If you don't mind, let's take some viewer questions. There's some good ones here. Let's see. First of all, Jeff Epstein, what's up, buddy? And it's the other Jeff Epstein, not that Jeff Epstein, the Jeff Epstein who sings the song on my podcast, Citizens Media TV. What's
I know
up, buddy?
Jeff Epstein well. I've met Jeff lots of times.
Yeah. So he says that Warren Mossler's free book, 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy, search Mossler 7 DIF PDF. Thank you for that. Kate, here's a really good question from Kate. When the stimulus money is given to the banks, does that mean they never have to pay it back?
No. When the Federal Reserve lends to banks, banks repay those loans to the Federal Reserve. They are getting those funds very, very cheaply, though. They're not paying a very high interest rate on it, but yes, that is paid back.
Okay. And then Kate also wants to know, Biden's policy is to cut Medicare and Medicaid. Is that BS? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, but I'll let you weigh in too, Stephen.
I'm not in a position to comment on Biden's policies.
US specific.
He's not going for Medicare for all. So I'm very much not on Team Biden. Well, but the impression I have is that he would be less catastrophic than Donald Trump.
Well, let me frame it in a more international way then. Like, how insane is it for you and just for, I mean, almost anyone else in the industrialized world, where you see that we don't even have, and when I say we, I mean the United States government and the powerful, not the people, but like our government doesn't even have the consensus that healthcare is a human right.
If I was to say, I hope this isn't going to offend anybody, if I was to say, in one or two respects, I mean, Australia is a corrupt country in some ways, but the US is a corrupt and failed state. It is particularly in healthcare. I was born in England. The National Health Service has been in place in England since the 1940s. Basic healthcare has been a right in Britain for the best part of a century. It is a right in every developed economy in the world, except the USA, I think. And the US, you spend, I can't remember what, it's a huge multiple of everybody else per capita on health.
Yeah, we spend about twice as more than everyone else, and we get less. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the most, and these people, Republicans, but some Democrats as well, they like to talk about efficiency and productivity. You've got the most inefficient and wasteful healthcare system in the world. It gives you gold-plated treatment if you've got the money for it. But meantime, it is probably the most important reason why the US underperforms other rich countries in terms of life expectancy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so something like austerity, that is just complete political nonsense because of the way our currency actually works.
Austerity, when you don't have tight full employment and accelerating inflation, is yes, complete nonsense. And it means that there are, well, depending on what the funds would have been spent on, it means there are people who are unemployed or underemployed. Your federal minimum wage, by the way, is a crime. It's just every federal politician who hasn't campaigned to raise it beyond $15.
Most of them don't. Most of them don't, Stephen.
Well, that again, I'm going to get in trouble. Probably won't get a visa next time I try and come to America. But they're all criminals.
You're in a safe space here, buddy.
It is a disgrace. The number of intelligent people, taxi drivers and others that I've met on those few occasions when I've been to the US that I've had conversations with, and I have discovered that they have never earned what is the legal minimum wage in Australia. Never.
Or in England, or in Canada, or in Switzerland, or in Sweden, or in,
Absolutely. So these things have to change. And if you want to have a decent federal minimum wage and it actually to apply to everybody, then you need a federal job guarantee as well to go along with it.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Brent wants to know, the Fed will now buy state municipal bonds. why don't states just get massive money from the Fed directly and do their own UBI and Medicare for all now? The Fed can just rip it up. The heck with Congress.
The Fed can't just rip it up. They can't just write off. The Federal Reserve, well, at least I don't think so. Again,
well, what about the part where could the state just get massive money from the Fed directly because they're buying the state municipal bonds, and then could they give it as a UBI to people? Is something like that possible?
I couldn't tell you whether it's possible legally. I suspect not.
Okay.
But a UBI, there are problems with a UBI. One of those problems is that in order to, a UBI would either be far too low to be useful, and that was the problem, a problem with the Yang UBI, I think. You couldn't live off it.
Mm-hmm.
A UBI, to be basic, it has to be high enough so that you could live off it. And the U part means it's universal. It has to go to everybody, including the guys on Wall Street. Now, it involves such an enormous federal outlay that without completely rewriting the tax system, it would be inflationary, in which case it wouldn't work anyway because you'd inflate away the adequacy of it. So sure, you could rewrite the tax system, but I don't honestly think there's any possibility of having such a radical rewrite of the tax system pass. People won't vote for it. So I think it doesn't work that way around. There are other issues too. A UBI could easily just turn into a subsidy for low-wage employers and an alternative to raising the minimum wage. And we have, and when I say this in front of psychologists, I have to be careful because they correct me. I often say we have dozens, and people then say, no, there's been hundreds. We have at least dozens and dozens of studies by sociologists, psychologists, and economists, which look in detail at the many non-financial costs of involuntary unemployment. And it is within the power of the federal government in the US to ensure that everybody who wishes to work has the opportunity to contribute towards social provisioning, to be doing something useful, and be paid a non-poverty wage for doing so. So I am in favor of a federal job guarantee. Now, not everybody that's in favor of a federal job guarantee is also in favor of a guaranteed minimum income, but I'm in favor of that too. Mm. If you had a guaranteed minimum income, it would actually achieve the same things as a UBI, but you would not have to completely rewrite the tax code in order to deliver it. So
that's basically, in some ways, that's like a smaller form of UBI.
Well, I think if you've got a federal job guarantee in place, virtually nobody will choose to be on that basic income. I mean, if you can't take part in a federal job guarantee, then you should have generous income support. If you can take part in it and you choose not to, even though the job guarantee itself should be defined very broadly, so that a wide variety of things that we don't think of as paid employment as now should be included in a federal job guarantee, ideally. But if you choose not to participate, and you have to live on beans, then fine. You're not going to get as much as people who are working in the job guarantee, and you shouldn't do. And there is I don't want to come over all Protestant work ethic here, but if you are consuming things, somebody is producing them. And if society wants to ask you to contribute towards the provisioning of society, given that you're not self-sufficient yourself, you do consume things that other people produce, then I think that is fair enough. But it's also, even though people don't always realize this, it tends to be middle-class people. Working class people don't usually talk along these lines, but we know that it's good for your mental health, your physical health, social connections you make. It means if you want a job in the conventional public sector or private sector later on, you're more employable. There are a whole series of, just from the point of view of your subjective well-being, if we ask people how happy or satisfied they are, It depends on the nature of the job you're doing, but we know that almost everyone is better off employed than involuntarily unemployed. So the job guarantee will deal with most of it. If you then have a guaranteed minimum income for people too, it is my view that virtually nobody will be on it, because if the job guarantee is attractive enough, everybody will choose to be on the job guarantee. But I'm not everybody that campaigns for a federal job guarantee also wants a guaranteed minimum income. I do. And as I said, that gets you to the end point of a UBI anyway, without having to persuade voters to completely rewrite the entire tax system.
And it would be a different, just to be clear, it would be a different scenario for somebody who could work and just chooses not to versus somebody who is not able to work. They would be taken care of differently. Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm afraid that basic income, if it was down to me, would be means tested too. If you've got millions of dollars in a bank account, you're not going to get it. But yes.
So I know we're out of time. I know you got to go, but I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming on here. And before you go, give people a place where you recommend they go to learn more. It can be maybe your website or books you recommend or whatever else. Where can people go to learn more?
Well, I have already recommended Stephanie Kelton's The Deficit Myth, and both I and Jeff have recommended Warren Mosler's book, 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy. I also recommend the website of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, which is run by two brilliant ecological modern monetary theory economists, one of whom, Fadel Kaboub, has written a lot about issues like...
Oh, gee, should we losing you right now? Oh, there you go.
Reparations, including global reparations as well. And Matt Fulstatter, who's written a lot about climate change and a job guarantee. So the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, look them up. And it'd be nice to interact with people on Twitter if they want to, when I make some ridiculous comment or other on Twitter, if they want to say hello and get involved in the conversation, that would be nice too. We do have our own website for the Sustainable Prosperity Action Group down here in Adelaide, but it's a little bit focused on Australia, but that would be interesting too. We did have that conference. The conference site is still up, the Sustainable Prosperity Conference in Adelaide. I think it's mmt.adelaide.2020.com, if I remember rightly.
Okay. All right.
There's lots of things to be looking at, but most of all, if I had to say follow one person particularly, I think that perhaps the most important economist in the world in the next 20 years, well, let me just say three now. Stephanie Kelton from Modern Monetary Theory, an English economist called Kate Raworth, who wrote a brilliant book called Donor Economics, which it goes through everything important as far as ecological economics is concerned, and an Italian called Mariano Mazzucato, who has written a variety of books, one of which is called The Entrepreneurial State, which discusses the appropriate role for the government in encouraging and directing the kind of innovations we're going to need to have a sustainable, prosperous future.
All right, and I'm going to add a fourth, Stephen Hale. Stephen Hale out of Adelaide. I'm adding a fourth to that list.
Thank you very much. You're too kind. Lovely to speak to you anyway, Ron.
Good to catch up with you, Stephen. Thank you so much for doing this. Have a great lecture today, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. I hope you'll come back on the show.
I hope so. Stay safe, everybody. Whatever else you do, stay safe.
Cheers, man. Peace.
Okay. Bye.
All right. How cool was that? I was I learned a lot. Did you guys learn a lot? I learned a lot from that chat. Very interesting chat. Let me go through. Susan Mercurio, what's up? You retracted your message twice, but thank you very much for the super chat contribution. I appreciate it very much, Susan, and I hope you're well. You're saying, why doesn't your message post on the super chat? I don't know. Why don't you just type it in the regular chat and I'll make sure I see it. But yeah, it says that you retracted it twice. Somebody was typing in howdy and it was being held for review. Which really bummed me out. And I don't know. I think it was for some reason. I don't know. I monitor the chat the best I can. I think eventually I'm going to need an actual moderator to make sure things are going the way they're supposed to, because YouTube does weird stuff all the time. But right now I'm just a one-man show. So I monitor it the best I can. And I mean, unless someone's like blatantly trolling or doxing or being very, like combative to other people, nothing should be held. I don't know. So I don't know what's up with that, Susan. Are you like cursing me out or something? Oh, geez. And now they just kicked me out. Now they just kicked me out completely. Did they just completely boot me? Am I still live? I don't know what just happened. Oh, it says I'm still going. It says I'm still live. I just lost everybody. Here, let me try to plug this back in so I can read the rest of the super chats. It's like completely just booted me out of everything. It just booted me away. It was just like, you're done here. We don't want. Oh, here we go. All right, here we go. I'm back. All right. So sorry for that awkward moment of silence. Dan says, "What the hell is going on?" Perfect. I'm having a Biden moment. No, you know what? I should have just looked away from the camera. Be like, I should have held my phone in my hand and just be like, am I alive? I don't. It seriously just booted me away. And then, anyway. All right. That was a moment. I apologize for that. But yeah, Susan, I don't know. I don't know what the hell happened with your question. Type it in the regular chat and I'll respond to it that way. Because for some reason, the super chat is just saying, what's up? Jeff Epstein, not that Jeff Epstein, the other Jeff Epstein who sings harmony on my show. Check his show out at Citizens Media TV. He says, two great people. Very happy to see this. Peace, love, and MMT. Thanks so much, Jeff. Look forward to seeing you again in Philadelphia when touring becomes a thing again. I give my regards to the fam. Dan Campbell, what's up, buddy? Thank you so much for the very generous super chat contribution. I appreciate it very much. Kate, what's up? I hope you're doing awesome. When the stimulus money is divvied to the banks, does that mean they ever have to pay it back? Biden's policy is to cut Medicare, Medicaid. So BS. We went ahead and answered that. Stephen answered that. Warren Mossler's book. Jeff recommends again. Brent, we answered your question as well. And Jeff, I think there's one other thing that I can't see from you. Oh no, you listed that PDF thing. So yeah, I think we're good. And then Susan, pop your thing in the chat. And I'll just answer it in the regular chat. Since for some reason, here we go. I tried to ask Dr. Hal, what about those who can't work? He looked disapproving of those who don't choose not to work. Okay, I gotcha. And I'm sorry that the super chat was saying message retracted a bunch. I felt like we kind of answered that because I asked him when he brought up that he wants a federal job guarantee, or excuse me, when he brought up a federal job guarantee, and then he said he also wanted a minimum income. He said that it would be different. The way that income would work is it would be a lot different for people who are not able to work versus people who are able to work and just choose not to. So I'd imagine in the scenario he described, if you are not able to work, and that's clear that you're not able to work, then you would get a much more sustainable sum each month that is enough to live on and live on fairly. But I think that if you are able to work and just choose not to, he's saying you would get less. I think that's basically what he was getting at based on the answers he gave to me. So Dan, what's up? You're still live, Ron. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that, Dan. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Jeff, again. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Thank you very much for your awesome questions. And thank you very much for Stephen Hale for lending his expertise in the field to us today. That was a very, very interesting chat. I really like talking to him a lot. It's always interesting to hear an international perspective too on just how insane we are here. I mean, it's like the Democrats are to the right of like their conservative parties for the most part. Like it's anyway, I don't preach to the choir. Anyway, guys, that was really cool. Check out the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity that Stephen mentioned. Check out Stephanie Kelton's most recent book, The Deficit Myth. I am on hold for that at my at the library. I use library in quotes because I'm using my Libby app to get it from the library, and I'm waiting for Stephanie Kelton's most recent book. Now, by the way, I'm waiting for the ebook. So I don't understand why I have to wait for the ebook. Why do they not just have like digital, like unlimited amounts of digital? I don't know why that is. I don't know. I'm sure somebody who understands that better than me could explain it. But I was just like, oh, you have to wait. You have to wait for that. I'm like, why do I have to wait for an ebook? I don't get it. Maybe they just do that to make their systems easier to keep track of. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know why that is. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. We'll be back tomorrow. Oh, and tomorrow my guests are going to be Fee and Pasta from the Convo Couch. You may have heard the Convo Couch is going through some struggles with YouTube. Apparently, they're not able to stream right now, or they're streaming via an alternative method. They're going to come on the show tomorrow. We're going to be back at our normal time tomorrow, by the way. We're at a different time today for Stephen Hale because he's in Australia. We're going to be back at the normal time tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And we're going to be talking to the Convo Couch, getting the full story of what happened to them. So we're going to be getting their story here. And I always love catching up with Fee and Pasta. They're awesome. So I can't wait to have them on the show tomorrow. It's going to be a really fun talk. And in the meantime, this weekend, guys, this Saturday, what are you doing Saturday? Do you have plans? Well, you do now. I'm doing a show at Flappers Comedy Club. I'm going to physically be in the club, but you're all going to be watching online. So we're getting one step closer to live comedy. And here's the deal. You can get tickets on my website, ronplacone.com. They'll send you a Zoom link right before the show starts, and you can watch it online. It's at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on Saturday, October 24th. And it's for a good cause, guys. You know that the stages all around the country, they're really suffering because live venues are going to be the last thing to reopen. We all know this. And the staff of these clubs and the people who run the clubs, they're really suffering right now. So I'm doing what I can for one of the stages in my backyard, and I'm doing a show at Flappers. All the proceeds from ticket sales go to the club. It goes to the club trying to stay open. You know, we've been doing a lot of online shows this year. We've been fortunate enough to be able to donate a lot of money to different bail bond funds, different local Black Lives Matter chapters. We've done something for Fight for the Future. We've done something for the Shower of Hope, which provides showers to homeless people in the Los Angeles area. We've been able to do a lot of things for a lot of great causes. And with this show, I'm going to be giving something directly to a club because, live venues, they are important for we, the live performers, and they're really suffering right now. So all the proceeds of those tickets, all of it goes to the club. So if you are interested, ronplacone.com, and I hope to see you Saturday night. And in the meantime, of course, I'll see you before then tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Thank you, everybody, for your Super Chat contributions. Once again, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dan. And patreon.com/Ron Placone for a Give What You Can level. You keep the show on the air, and you get your own theme song if you want it. How cool is that? All for a Give What You Can level. You get your own theme song. People are loving their theme songs. Patreon.com/Ron Placone if you are on stable ground and interested. In the meantime, I will see you tomorrow. You know the drill till then. Lucy says meow. I say peace. Peace.